In this episode, we're going to take the idea of anomalous behavior and turn it into a practical skill that makes security triage feel less like guessing and more like disciplined reasoning. Beginners often imagine that an anomaly is simply anything unusual, but security teams quickly learn that unusual is everywhere, and treating every unusual thing as dangerous leads to burnout and missed priorities. What we really care about is meaningful anomaly, the kind that suggests an unwanted event path could be unfolding, such as credential misuse, data abuse, or lateral movement inside a network. The difference between noise and signal comes from pattern recognition, context, and a consistent way of asking the same questions every time an alert appears. This is also where the Security Operations Center, SOC, becomes credible, because credibility is built when analysts can explain why something matters and what to do next. By the end, you should be able to describe how anomalies are detected, how they are analyzed, and how that analysis becomes actionable triage rather than endless investigation. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.author.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A strong starting point is understanding that an anomaly is not automatically evidence of an attack, because many legitimate activities look unusual when you view them in isolation. A system might behave differently after a plan change. A user might access an unfamiliar resource because their role shifted, or a business process might generate a burst of traffic during a deadline. If you react to every single anomaly as if it were malicious, you will create constant crisis mode, and constant crisis mode makes real incidents harder to spot. At the same time, if you assume anomalies are harmless because most of them are, you risk ignoring the small, early signals that often appear before major harm occurs. Effective triage lives between those extremes by treating anomalies as questions, not conclusions. The question is not simply what is different, but why it is different, whether the difference aligns with known business context, and whether the difference matches patterns that commonly lead to harm. That disciplined approach keeps curiosity without turning every curiosity into panic. Anomalous behavior becomes truly useful when it is understood as a pattern across time, across systems, or across actions, rather than as a single isolated event. A single failed login is usually not meaningful, but a cluster of failed logins followed by a successful login from an unusual location and then rapid access to sensitive resources can be meaningful as a combined story. A single unusual network connection may be harmless, but a sequence of connections that expands outward to many systems can suggest exploration or lateral movement. A single data access may be legitimate, but an unusual volume of access followed by exports or deletions can indicate misuse or preparation for damage. Patterns are what turn anomalies into narratives that can be investigated efficiently, because narratives give you a pathway to test. The best triage decisions are made when analysts can say, "This looks like a known type of event path, and here is what we should check next to confirm or rule it out." That is what makes analysis actionable rather than endless. The first ingredient in detecting meaningful anomaly is a baseline, because you cannot reliably call something anomalous without knowing what normal looks like for that environment, that system, and that identity. Baselines are not rigid rules. They are expectations that reflect business rhythms, system roles, and typical access patterns. When baselines are missing or stale, detection becomes either overly sensitive or overly blind, because it is comparing today to an imaginary normal rather than an observed one. This is why effective anomaly detection is connected to inventory and classification, since critical systems and sensitive data need better baselines and tighter interpretation. Baselines also support fairness and accuracy in user behavior analysis, because different roles naturally behave differently, and comparing everyone to the same idea of normal creates false alarms. As baselines mature, anomaly detection shifts from generic thresholds to context-aware detection, which reduces noise and increases trust. Trust matters because triage only works when the team believes the signals are worth attention. Once an anomaly is detected, the next step is to add context quickly, because context determines whether the anomaly is probably benign, ambiguous, or urgent. Context includes who performed the action, what privileges that identity has, what assets are involved, and how those assets connect to critical business functions. Context also includes timing, such as whether the action occurred during a known maintenance window or during a period when certain batch jobs typically run. Another layer of context comes from recent change, because new deployments and configuration changes can create unusual patterns that are expected but still need monitoring for side effects. Vendor and dependency context matters as well, because unusual behavior in a third-party service can have different implications than unusual behavior inside an internal system. Adding context is not about slowing down with bureaucracy. It is about preventing wasted effort and preventing harmful delay. A well-run SOC develops habits for gathering this context rapidly and consistently so that triage decisions are grounded in the environment's reality. A key beginner misunderstanding is assuming that anomaly analysis is mainly about technical detail, when in practice it is often about asking the right questions in the right order. The first question is whether the anomaly could plausibly be explained by expected business activity, and if so, what evidence would support that explanation. The second question is whether the anomaly aligns with a common attack path, such as credential misuse, privilege escalation, or data staging, and if so, what corroborating signals should exist if that path is real. The third question is what the potential impact would be if the anomaly represents a real incident, because impact determines urgency and escalation. The fourth question is what containment or protection steps are appropriate while uncertainty remains, because sometimes you cannot wait for perfect proof. These questions create a repeatable method that different analysts can apply consistently, which is crucial for defensible results. When the method is consistent, the SOC can improve over time by tuning the questions and evidence checks rather than relying on individual instinct. Anomalies in identity behavior are among the most important to interpret carefully because identity is often the doorway into systems and data. Meaningful identity anomalies often involve a mismatch between role and action, such as an account accessing a system it never touches, or a privileged account behaving like an ordinary user account would not behave. Another meaningful identity pattern is speed and sequence, such as rapid sign-ins followed by rapid access to many resources, which can indicate automated misuse rather than human work. Timing can be relevant, but timing alone is rarely sufficient because people work odd hours for legitimate reasons, especially during emergencies. The more credible signals are combinations, such as unusual time plus unusual location plus unusual resource access plus unusual volume. Identity anomalies also require care because organizations have service accounts, shared responsibilities, and shifting roles, which can create legitimate but unfamiliar patterns. Actionable triage here is less about accusing and more about verifying, asking whether the behavior matches a known legitimate workflow, and escalating only when the mismatch cannot be explained quickly. Anomalies in network behavior can be just as valuable, especially when you think about networks as relationships rather than as pipes. A meaningful network anomaly often looks like a system communicating in a new direction, communicating with a new set of peers, or communicating with unusual volume or frequency for its role. A user device suddenly initiating connections like a server, or a server suddenly scanning many internal systems, can indicate behavior that deserves fast triage even before you know the cause. Network anomalies also include unexpected changes in data flow paths, such as sensitive data moving through unfamiliar routes or to unfamiliar services. What makes these anomalies actionable is connecting them to known architectures and expected boundaries, because boundaries are where abnormal paths often stand out most clearly. Analysts should also be aware that network anomalies can indicate misconfiguration or failure, not just attack, and both can matter because misconfiguration can create exposure and failure can create availability risk. The goal is to treat the anomaly as a signal of a change in the environment story and then decide what kind of story it might be. Data behavior anomalies are often the highest stakes signals because data is frequently the asset with the greatest long-term impact when mishandled. A meaningful data anomaly can involve unusual access volume, unusual export patterns, unusual modification patterns, or unusual access by roles that do not normally interact with that data type. Context matters heavily here, because some roles legitimately perform bulk access, such as reporting or reconciliation, but even legitimate bulk access should follow predictable rhythms and tools. A sudden spike in access combined with access to a broader set of records than usual can be more concerning than a spike alone, because it suggests searching rather than routine work. Data anomalies also include integrity signals, such as unexpected changes to critical records or unusual deletion patterns, because integrity attacks can be subtle and damaging. Actionable triage requires knowing which data is most sensitive and which systems govern it, because escalation decisions depend on potential harm, not just on unusual behavior. When data anomalies are analyzed with disciplined context, the SOC can prevent both overreaction and underreaction in some of the most consequential situations. One of the most practical ways to make anomaly analysis actionable is to look for correlation, which means asking whether multiple independent signals point to the same underlying event path. If an identity anomaly appears, and around the same time, a network anomaly shows unusual internal connections from a system the identity touched, and a data anomaly shows unusual access from that same system, the combined picture becomes far more credible. Correlation reduces uncertainty because it is harder for multiple different sensors or observations to be wrong in the same misleading direction at the same time. It also helps analysts prioritize, because a single weak signal might be low priority, but several weak signals aligned into a coherent story can become high priority quickly. Correlation does not require fancy mathematics to be valuable. It requires a habit of asking what else should be true if this anomaly represents a real incident. That habit creates efficient investigation paths, because instead of exploring everything, you test a small number of high-value hypotheses. When correlation is practiced consistently, triage becomes faster and more confident. Actionable triage also depends on distinguishing between severity and confidence, because those two ideas can point in different directions. Severity is about potential impact if the anomaly is part of a real incident, while confidence is about how strongly the available evidence supports that conclusion. A high-severity, low-confidence situation can still require rapid action, because waiting for certainty could allow catastrophic damage. A low-severity, high-confidence situation can be handled calmly and may not require escalation, even if it is clearly a real policy violation. Good triage makes both dimensions visible so decisions are proportionate and defensible. This also helps communication, because you can tell stakeholders, we have a credible, unusual pattern with high potential impact, but we are still confirming details, and here is what we are doing now. That style avoids speculation while still enabling timely response. Beginners should learn that triage is not about being right instantly. It is about reducing risk efficiently under uncertainty. Another major factor in actionable triage is avoiding the trap of investigating without deciding, because investigations can expand endlessly if you do not set decision points. A decision point might be a clear threshold of evidence that triggers escalation, or a clear set of checks that, if negative, allows the case to be closed as benign. Decision points prevent analysts from spending hours chasing low-value threads, and they also prevent the opposite problem of closing too quickly without testing the most important hypothesis. Decision points work best when they are aligned with known event paths and with organizational tolerance, because what counts as enough evidence depends on how much harm is possible. They also work best when they include ownership, because someone must be responsible for making the call to escalate, contain, or close. This is where playbooks and case management connect directly to anomaly analysis, because the playbook defines the decision points and the case record preserves the reasoning. When decision points are used consistently, the SOC becomes more predictable and trustworthy. Anomaly detection and analysis also must account for false positives and false negatives in a way that supports learning rather than blame. A false positive is an alert that suggests a problem where none exists, and too many false positives create fatigue and slow response. A false negative is a missed detection, and false negatives are dangerous because they create a false sense of safety. Actionable triage improves when the organization treats both as feedback about baselines, context quality, and control coverage, not as personal failure. If alerts fire constantly on normal behavior, the baseline or thresholds likely need tuning, or the context used to judge normal might be incomplete. If incidents occur without signals, visibility gaps may exist, or detection logic may not reflect real attack paths. The important beginner lesson is that anomaly programs improve by measuring and adjusting, not by expecting perfection. When the SOC learns systematically, detection becomes quieter but sharper, and triage becomes both faster and more accurate. Communication is the final step that makes anomaly analysis useful, because analysis that stays in an analyst's head does not protect the organization. Actionable triage requires clear communication to the right owners with the right level of certainty and the right next steps. The message should explain what was observed, why it appears anomalous relative to baseline, what the potential impact could be, and what actions are recommended or already taken. It should also clearly separate what is known from what is suspected, because decision-makers need truth, not confidence theater. When escalation is needed, communication must be timely, because the value of early detection is lost if the organization waits too long to coordinate response. When closure is appropriate, communication should still capture what was learned so that baselines and playbooks can be improved. This habit builds institutional memory and reduces repeated confusion. Over time, good communication turns anomaly detection into a reliable organizational capability rather than a stream of isolated alerts. To conclude, detecting and analyzing anomalous behavior patterns for actionable security triage is about turning unusual observations into disciplined decisions that reduce harm and reduce wasted effort. Anomalies become meaningful when they are evaluated as patterns with context, tied to baselines of normal network, data, and user behavior, and tested against plausible event paths rather than treated as instant proof of attack. Actionable analysis relies on quick context gathering, correlation across signals, clear separation of severity and confidence, and decision points that guide escalation, containment, or closure without endless investigation. The SOC becomes credible when analysts can explain why a pattern matters, what evidence supports that view, and what the next action should be, while also learning from false positives and false negatives to improve over time. When communication is clear and outcome-focused, triage decisions become faster, calmer, and more defensible, even under uncertainty. If you can consistently move from an anomaly to a coherent story, test that story with high-value evidence, and choose proportionate action, you have mastered the core of practical detection work, making the signal usable when it matters most.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit BareMetalCyber.com.